Hello, thank you for joining me. I'm Mike, and we're looking today at Hebrews 12, verses 14 to 24. It's kind of two parts of this passage. The first is encouraging us to keep pure in our behaviour and attitudes, and the second is kind of contrasting how we can approach God now in the new covenant compared to the old covenant. So first of all, I'd just like to pick out a phrase in the first part of the passage, which is, let me find the verse 15, which talks about looking carefully lest any of us fall short of the grace of God, and lest any of us any root of bitterness springs up, causing trouble, and by this defiles many. A root of bitterness is a terrible thing, because it can grow within somebody. It can cause them to be complaining and critical, and then that whole attitude spreads to others, and we don't want any of that. It's just so harmful to both to individuals and to others. And the tricky thing about a root of bitterness, I think, is that very often bitterness might be grounded on a grievance, which is actually where there has been injustice, where somebody's been treated badly, and they feel they're not being treated well, and they feel they have a justifiable grievance. And of course, there are ways of dealing that with people in the body, going to speaking to people, etc., and being reconciled and speaking the truth in love and that kind of thing. But we mustn't allow a root of bitterness to settle within us. And the danger is, that we then think we're justified in being bitter, and that can have all sorts of harmful effects. And I think it's interesting in this verse 15. It says, "Looking carefully, lest any of you fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springs up." And it seems to me that there's a link between bitterness on the one hand and falling short of the grace of God. Because once we get into bitterness, it's like we're standing on our rights, our rights for justice or revenge or whatever it happens to be. And we're no longer standing on the grace of God, because the grace of God has nothing to do with our rights. In fact, we have no rights to the grace of God. It's completely undeserved. That's the whole point about it. And so we need to make sure that we are standing on the grace of God. We're not looking to, first and foremost, to how we've been treated or this, that, and the other, but we're just thankful that actually, by God, we've not been treated as we deserve. We're standing on his grace. Because if it was a matter of justice, when we stand before God's throne, it would be unspeakable, the punishment that we would receive. But we're standing on his grace. So let's continue to stand on his grace. And then the second part of the passage, it talks about how terrifying it was in the old covenant to come near to the presence of God and Mount Sinai, and yet the contrast in the new covenant, where we have Jesus as our mediator, then the blood of the new covenant speaks a better word, it says, than the blood of Abel. But there's one particular phrase that struck me, which I was kind of a bit tickled by, really. I was reading in the New King James Version. It says, "And the church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven." The General Assembly and church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven. Now, in the last kind of 18 months, we've got very used to having to register for events. During the pandemic period, or during the kind of lockdown periods, or as we were easing out of lockdown and we were having in-person services, you had to register at Frontline. And that's kind of become commonplace for events, hasn't it, to register online for events. And yet I just like the way that it used that word registered in heaven in the New King James. And it just gave me a sense of, wow, isn't that amazing? I have registered to come to the worship event later in October at Frontline. But an even greater reality is that my name is registered right now in heaven. I don't know how God does it. There's no online technology that does it. I'm registered by the blood of Jesus, and so are you. You know, we are registered in a far more real way than if we've registered for an event. We are registered, our names are registered in heaven. And it struck me that if we hold on to that, Jesus says, don't rejoice that the demons are subject to you, but rather rejoice that your names are written in heaven. If we hold that dear to our hearts, if we hold close to us the grace of God upon our lives, then we won't fall into bitterness, because we will be standing on what we don't deserve, which is his wonderful grace and the fact that our names are written in his book in heaven. So my point for the day is just hold on to and rejoice in the grace that is upon your life, and that your name is registered in heaven. God bless.